In 2026, Dan Bongino sat across from Sean Hannity and said that he was terrified. Terrified of federal prison. Terrified of thugs showing up at his house. Terrified of a justice system he believes will come for him the moment Republicans lose the next election. And if you've followed his career for any length of time, you know how strange those words sound coming from him. For over a decade, Dan Bongino was the loudest voice in conservative media telling everyone else to stop being afraid. So what happened to Dan Bongino inside the FBI? What did he find in there that the rest of us still haven't seen? And why is he the one losing sleep over what comes next? Before we get into it, don't forget to like and hit that subscribe button to get more stories behind the people you thought you already knew. The conversation that night was supposed to be an easy one. Two old colleagues on a podcast microphone, none of the noise that usually surrounds a Fox News studio. Sean Hannity on one side, Dan Bongino on the other, and the kind of relaxed back and forth an audience usually doesn't expect to remember. Then, somewhere in the middle of it, Bongino started saying things that didn't sound like him at all. He told Hannity he was scared, and he meant the word in the plainest sense. It crossed his mind every single day. He genuinely believed that the moment Republicans lost the next presidential election, someone would come after his life. He talked about thugs showing up at his front door and being thrown into federal prison on something invented, the way he believes it was invented for Donald Trump. Then came the part that made you sit up a little straighter. Bongino said that he had brought in an outside attorney during his time at the FBI just to make sure every single thing he and Kash Patel did was clean and by the book. And then he said it didn't matter because they would simply rewrite the book. Now, this isn't just random theorizing. That's a man who's already done the math. For most of his career, Bongino was the one telling everyone else to calm down, pushing back the doomers, and insisting the system still worked if you were willing to fight for it. Now he was sitting on his friend's show, admitting that he didn't sleep the way that he used to, genuinely worried about who might come through the door if the wrong person won the 2028 election. You don't really say things like that into a microphone unless something inside you has already shifted in a way you can't shift back. Which leaves the rest of us with this obvious question. What did he see inside that building? What was in those burn bags he keeps mentioning? What actually happened in the months between the day Donald Trump named him deputy director of the FBI and the day he walked out the door for good? Whatever it was, it followed him home and it hasn't left. And it doesn't square with the man his audience knew. Because the Bongino on Hannity's podcast and the Bongino who built the career are two different people. Long before he was a Saturday night face on Fox News, Bongino was earning his name in places where being loud wasn't even allowed. For 4 years in the 1990s, he wore an NYPD badge. After that came 12 years in the Secret Service, standing close enough to two presidents to count their breathing. George W. Bush on one side of the calendar, Barack Obama on the other. The same job, the same expectation. Read the room, watch every hand, don't blink. That is not work for people who startle easily. 12 years of it would break someone whose nerves were thin. When he walked away from the agency in 2011, the easy move would have been a quiet exit, take a private security gig, cash a consulting check, or even disappear. Bongino did the opposite. He ran for Congress in Maryland and lost. 2 years later, he ran in a different district, but lost again. Most people would have given up after the first defeat and probably even after the second, but Bongino kept going. The books came after that. 3 of them, including one that pulled the curtain back on the Secret Service from the inside, the kind of writing that turns a man into a name on the political circuit, and makes a lot of former colleagues stop returning his calls. The radio show built itself out next, and the podcast that grew alongside it became one of the biggest political programs in the country. Millions of people were turning in every single day to hear him take swings at people who could ruin most careers with a phone call. There's something worth pausing on right there. Most people who pick fights with that much of the political establishment learn to soften their tone over time. They learn what not to say. Bongino went in the other direction. The bigger he got, the louder he got. It's not the resume of a man who scares easy. It's the resume of someone who had spent his entire adult life refusing to step out of the fight, even when stepping out was the smarter move. And in the middle of all of it While the radio show and the podcast were both pulling in record numbers, a doctor found something in his neck. For the first time in his career, he was facing something that volume couldn't fix. The diagnosis came back as Hodgkin's lymphoma, a cancer of the lymphatic system, which is the part of the body that's supposed to fight everything else off. Bongino did what people in his position usually do first. He went public. On his podcast, he walked his audience through what was coming: radiation, hospital visits, the kind of grind that takes a year out of most lives and leaves the person changed in ways that they don't talk about for a long time. That should have been the slowdown, the chapter where he stepped back from the spotlight, took a breath, and let the other people carry the weight for a while. Instead, in June 2021, while he was still navigating the fallout from cancer treatment, Fox News handed him his own Saturday night show, Unfiltered with Dan Bongino. By the time it found its rhythm, it was averaging well over 1 million viewers a week. He wasn't a guest on someone else's program anymore. The show had his name on it. That's something to sit with right there. A man comes through cancer, and the first thing he does is take on a bigger platform with more visibility and a bigger target on his back. That's not some recovery story. That's him making a statement. And the statements kept coming. When his own radio company tried to make their employees take the COVID vaccine, Bongino threatened to walk away from the entire arrangement rather than go alongside it. He had been vaccinated himself, but he called the mandates immoral, and he said it loud enough that his bosses heard him. YouTube banned him for what he said on the platform about the same vaccines. There was no apology, no quiet delete and move on. He kept saying it. By the time we get to April 2023, Bongino is one of the most visible conservative voices in the country. The Fox show, the podcast, the radio program, the books, the audience. Then he announces he's leaving Fox News. Just like that. Walking away from the Saturday night slot, the studio, and the network. He tells his radio listeners on a Thursday morning that there's no big story behind it. He and Fox couldn't agree on a contract extension, and that was the whole thing. He passed on doing the final goodbye episode. Most hosts in his position would have taken that farewell as a victory lap. Bongino, he just left. If you're enjoying this so far, take 2 seconds and just hit like on the video. It really helps our channel keep telling stories like this one. But here's the thing about it. By every reasonable measure, Bongino should have came out of those years smaller. Cancer slows people down. Public fights with corporate bosses cost careers. Getting banned from YouTube ends pundits. Walking away from a Saturday night Fox slot is the kind of move you usually don't recover from. None of it touched him, which is why what happened next caught everyone off guard. The man who had spent his career saying yes to every fight in front of him got an offer that this time he genuinely had every reason to turn down. The call came in early 2025. Donald Trump was back in the White House. Kash Patel was being lined up as the next FBI director, and somebody at the top wanted Bongi Hannity in as Patel's number 2. It's worth thinking about what that actually was. For more than a decade, Bongino had built a career on tearing into the FBI. He had named names on his podcast. He had used his microphone to call out what he believed was rot inside the Bureau. He had told his audience over and over that the agency had been weaponized against ordinary Americans. And now the people running the country were asking him to walk into the same building and become second in command. By every commercial measure, it was a bad deal. The podcast was making real money. His audience trusted him. He had spent more than a decade building a platform that he owned outright, with no boss telling him what he could and couldn't say. Walking into the deputy director seat meant giving up most of that. Salaries inside the federal government don't compete with what a top-tier conservative podcast pulls in. The hours are brutal. The microphone goes silent the moment you take the oath. He took it anyway. In March of 2025, Bongino was sworn in as Deputy Director of the FBI. The version of him that showed up to the press conference said all the right things. He was going to help restore an agency the public could trust again. Transparency, accountability, rule of law. The standard list delivered by a man who had been hammering on those exact words for years from the outside. There's something almost touching about that moment if you look back on it now, because what we now know, and what he didn't say out loud at the time, is that he genuinely believed he could fix it. He thought that he and Patel could go in there, find what was broken, clean it out, and hand the country back an FBI that was working the way it was supposed to. And boy, he was wrong. And the speed at which he found out he was wrong is the part of the story that nobody has fully reckoned with yet. Within months of taking the job, things started leaking. Internal disagreements, tension with Attorney General Pam Bondi over how the Jeffrey Epstein files were being handled. By July, sources were telling Fox News that Bongino was thinking about resigning. He took a day off in frustration. The White House rushed to put out a statement insisting that there was no daylight between Bongino, Patel, and Bondi, and that anyone reporting otherwise was just making it up. But anyone watching closely knew something had cracked, and whatever cracked in there, it was bigger than a memo about Epstein. By the time he left in January 2026, the man who walked out the door was already starting to sound like a man who would, 4 months later, sit across from Sean Hannity and use the word terrified. On the Hannity podcast, Bongino kept coming back to one detail that didn't get a lot of attention in the news cycle that followed. He talked about burn bags. Inside the FBI, a burn bag is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. A bag of paper that's supposed to be destroyed. Documents you don't keep. Records that are never meant to leave the building intact. Bongino told Hannity that during his time inside the Bureau, he and his team found what he described as the mother lode of secret Russiagate files inside those bags. Files that, if his account is accurate, somebody had wanted gone. And here's where the story stops being about a man who took a hard job and had a tough year. Because if what Bongino is saying is true, then the Russia collusion investigation, the one that consumed 3 years of American politics during the first Trump term, has paperwork buried inside it that the people running the FBI at the time tried to make disappear. So that isn't a small claim. That's the kind of claim a person makes only after they've seen something that genuinely shook them. He also told Hannity there were people inside the Bureau actively leaking against him during his time there. These weren't policy disagreements or professional disputes. It was sabotage from his own colleagues aimed at making sure that he and Patel couldn't finish what they started. Imagine walking into a job that you took out of conviction and learning, day by day, that the people working alongside you are working against you, that the documents you need to find your footing have been put in bags marked for incineration, that every move you make is being timed for a leak to the press. Now imagine spending 11 months inside that. It explains the man who showed up on Sean Hannity's podcast. The one who said he thinks about federal prison every single day. The one who hired an outside attorney just to make sure his own paperwork was clean. The one who looked at his wife and admitted that he was scared of what might come through the door if the wrong election went the wrong way. Bongino didn't break inside that building. The fight he saw in there is the kind of fight a person doesn't unsee. And once you've seen it, you don't get to pretend the system you used to defend is the same system you walked into. That's the part of the story that should make all of us sit very still for a moment. Because Bongino isn't a man given to panic. He had every advantage walking in. He had the President of the United States behind him. He had a media empire of his own to fall back on. He had Kash Patel as a partner. And it still wasn't enough to keep him there. For 30 years, Dan Bongino walked towards every fight in front of him. He stood next to presidents. He survived a cancer that should have slowed him down. He built one of the biggest microphones in conservative media and used it on people most pundits learned to be careful with. Every time the safer move was to step back, he stepped forward. Then he stepped inside the FBI, and 11 months later, he walked out and started using a word his audience had never heard him use before. Maybe he's right about what's coming for him. Maybe he's wrong. Maybe the truth lives somewhere none of us can see out here. But there is something worth holding on to in all of it. This man who spent his whole career telling everyone else not to be afraid is the same man who has now told us in plain language that he is. He doesn't strike me as the kind of person who scares for sport. So what do you think? Is Bongino right to be worried, or is he seeing ghosts? Drop your thoughts in the comment. We read every one. I'll see you next time.